This is Paul Davis with MCTV. I'm here with Kenneth Bond, a Palo resident, Miami County resident, and a veteran of the Navy. And Ken, well, so I don't mess it up, will you tell the viewers what your rank was or what your position was in the military or in the Navy?
I started out as an apprentice seaman, and during the course of my 4 years in service, I ended up with a petty officer first class rating ship's cook. You can see my badge. I still am very proud of it. I still wear it. And the 4 years that I spent in the Navy taught me many things. My story is probably the same as many would tell you. It was a wartime story. I'm not going to talk about bullets and bombs and things like that. I'd like to tell you about life as it happened to me in the United States Navy.
Where did you, where was your first, how old were you when you first got into the military?
I was 17 years of age when I joined. I was born in November the 5th, 1924. I was 17 years old. I joined the Navy in January of 1942, right after Pearl Harbor.
So what were your thoughts, with Pearl Harbor just happening and going into World War II?
Pearl Harbor happened to me as I was working on a ranch in California at the time for a charcoal factory. We cut live oak trees and put them in huge ovens and made charcoal out of it. On the ranch that I was working, we heard about Pearl Harbor over the radio. Well, I got to thinking, my dream is coming true. I can go into the Navy. I wanted to belong in the Navy ever since I was a little boy of, gosh, about 10 years old. I saw a moving picture of a guy on the signal bridge waving the flags around. I thought, that's for me. I want to be a sailor. So when Pearl Harbor came and the war broke out, I went home. I got my mother's permission to join the Navy, and I went to boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, which was just a little bit south of Milwaukee.
So at that time they weren't doing an automatic.
Conscription started just a month or two after I joined the Navy.
Wow.
And I told my mom she didn't want me to go, and I told her they're gonna make you go anyway to the Army, and I don't want to be in the Army. So she signed my papers, and down to boot camp I went for 4 weeks. Ordinarily, a training period is 3 months, but during the war they needed people trained and so badly to get them out into various places of duty. And when I was 18 years of age, this is what I looked like.
Just a strapping young lad. Look at that.
And then
so just real quick, how big were you in size?
I was 6 feet tall as I am now, and I weighed then 135 pounds. A lot less than I do now.
So, when you're in the Navy, as far as boot camp, do they have boot camp for the Navy, or is it something different?
Yes, we had the boot camp at Great Lakes, and every morning began at daybreak, and we got up and did calisthenics for 1 hour before breakfast. And this was again in January of 1942, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Great Lake, Illinois, between Milwaukee and Chicago. And it was cold. I don't remember how cold it was, but Lake Michigan was almost froze over.
Oh my goodness.
Part of the training we were supposed to take, boat drill, to get in lifeboats. Well, the harbor where Great Lakes Naval Station was at was froze over. So we didn't get any lifeboat duty or training.
So obviously you knew how to swim.
I did know how to swim. I learned how to swim at the YMCA when I was just a boy.
So were there other soldiers, other men in the Navy? Did some of them not know how to? Or I guess did some of them not know how to swim, or?
That's one of the ironies of life aboard ship. Of 100 people, probably only 50 people knew how to swim.
Really?
Yes. And that was the amazing thing, that why so many sailors were so afraid of shipwrecks, torpedoes, to where they would have to get into the water. Now that was an irony that I am still amazed at, to the fact that in that day, now I don't know how it is today, but in those days, hardly anybody, well, they didn't have many swimming pools in the Depression anyway. And the YMCA and places like that were the only places you had swimming pools other than Lake Michigan or rivers or ponds.
Mm-hmm.
But most young fellows coming into the service at that time did not know how to swim, and they wanted to train swimming and do boat drills. But at that time of the year, the lake was froze over.
Really? So, okay, going back to boot camp.
Then,
Did you ever have to get into the Lake Michigan? I mean, get to the cold water?
no, we didn't again because the lake was froze over.
Or well, I mean, as far as like getting in the cold water.
Then the training that we got as far as lake training was out in Seattle, Washington when I went to Cooks and Baker School. There we had to go to fire duty, fire training, to where fires aboard ship is one of the most tragic things that can happen aboard ship. And they had there a place where you jumped off of a tower into the water.
Oh my gosh.
And then we had other people that were training how to rescue. So you traded off. You were either the jumper and then somebody else rescued you. So we did get training on if your ship was attacked and went down, you did have training in rescue work of out of the sea.
Now, this might be a question that I don't know if anybody would ask, but I mean, as far as the fires and ships, that's the main fear. One of the main fears. Do you ever have to worry about? I mean, fires in the kitchen?
Not that I know. I never, of the 4 ships I was on, I never had one. So we had oil that we used regular fuel oil to fire the boiler, to fire the ranges for the anything. Then we had steam coppers. We call them big kettles, and they were fed off of the steam lines that was generated up in the engine room.
Now, okay. Did you have to get training for to handle guns, to handle ammunition?
We all were issued rifles in boot camp, and we had an order drill of how to present the arms in different fashions. That came along with the marching, the physical fitness training that you got in the 4 weeks there in boot camp. Because they did not know whether you would ever become part of a landing party or something like that where you would need to bear arms from your ship. But I did become, when I went to Cooks and Baker School and became a cook, of course there was no need for me to learn how to further learning on with handling firearms.
Yeah. So did you have to deal with any hand-to-hand combat?
We had very little of that in boot camp.
Really?
I would imagine Army and Marine Corps that was their primary emphasis was on physical combat.
So how did you go from? You said that when you were a kid you saw those guys flagging and you wanted to be that. How did you get into the cooking mix?
Well, when the original papers that I signed to go into the Navy, the questionnaire was one of the questions: what was your last job in civilian life? And it was the last job I had prior to working on that ranch that I told you about was being a fry cook. So they said Cooks and Baker School for you. So that was my next duty station was Bremerton Navy Yard in Seattle, Puget Sound, and then I went to Cooks and Baker School for 16 weeks. And then from there I went on board my first ship then.
Now when you were cooking, this is you were there. Is it just one thing you cooked, or did you cook meals like
we cooked meals for the people that worked in the shipyard as well as the naval personnel on the ship. We served, if I recall correctly, at least 20,000 meals a day.
Really?
And 20,000 people 2 or 3 times a day, depending upon how long the shipyard workers were there. We had we had a bakery, a separate galley, that's where the food was prepared and served. We had a separate meat, they called it the butcher shop, where the carloads of beef came in and then they were broken down into pieces that the cooks could cook with. So you had to have training as a meat cutter, as a baker, and as a cook. Because when you went aboard ship, you would have to perform all 3 functions.
Yeah. Now, as far as, obviously you were in battles. You were in gunfights.
We were.
Where were you in relation to that? Were you in the kitchen all the
as
time?
As a non-combatant, the first thing that happened when you were in a battle situation, all the lights were turned off except little red battle lanterns on different places in the compartments in the ship. Then as a non-combatant, again, my duty was in magazine lockers, handing ammunition up to the next deck, and then somebody else went ahead and handed it up to the gun platforms.
Okay.
Almost always cooks, the people that worked in the offices, the people that worked in the engine room, naturally their duties, their battle station would still be the engine room, keep the engine working. But people like myself, we were responsible for seeing that the ammunition got carried up to the gun platforms.
Now, you said, I mean, off camera, I was talking about the change from when you first were on board. I think you said planes, propellers.
Now we're a little ahead of our story there. We're talking about getting into an aircraft carrier, and I'll postpone that till we get to the aircraft carrier.
A little bit.
The first ships that I were on was escort vessels, and if you can show that to the folks. The first one up here was a little tiny wooden ship, and it was a submarine chaser, and the job was to chase submarines escorting convoy merchant ships that were hauling various kinds of cargo. We left Portland, Seattle, Washington, Puget Sound Harbor, and we went up all the way up along the coast of Alaska. We stopped at Sitka and Kodiak, 2 or 3 of the other islands, escorting oil tankers and supply ships, taking supplies to our people stationed on those islands in the Alaskan chain, Aleutian chain. The next escort vessel was a PCE or a DE. The hull was the same, and that duty we escorted convoys from Pearl Harbor. Here's the track of our chart. We started where we would take and escort convoys down to Pearl Harbor, and then pick up a convoy that would come all the way back to Pearl this way. We escorted some ships out into the Marianas, to all these different various islands out in the South Pacific. And then, of course, the homeward bound, we would stop back in any of the West Coast ports and then pick up convoys to bring them back.
So now, okay, when Pearl Harbor was hit, was it out of commission for the whole war? Or?
It was out of commission for about 2 months. And I want to bring out right now into our conversation how much emphasis has been placed on service people in wartime, and then veterans like myself. We wouldn't be able to do anything without the people that worked in the shipyards, in the airplane factories, the people that worked in the tanks, that built tanks. In other words, all of the Rosie the Riveters, all the women and older men and people that couldn't join the services that worked in the various shipyards. My father-in-law was a dentist here in Paola. His practice got so low because people that were going through the war and war plants, so one of his wife's relatives called us from California and said they had a job for him out in California, working in a shipyard. Here's a dentist working in a shipyard. So he went out there, he learned welding, he learned how to help weld different parts on a ship out there in Long Beach Shipyard. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the war would never have been won by the service people had it not been for the people that supported us by giving us the planes, the ships, the tanks, the bullets, all of those kind of things, the provisions that kept us fed and so forth. I wouldn't have been able to cook for my shipmates had not somebody in the shore stations sent and prepared food for us.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, I guess if you think about it logically, I mean, your job on the ship was one of the most important jobs because, I mean, if the people don't get fed, then they don't have energy.
You know, I never thought of myself as being important because I thought of the people that did the firing of the weapons, that ran the engine room and those things. But I had a number of people tell me that they thought I was important because I did keep everybody fed. And
that's the truth too. I mean,
it is the truth in essence. And I knew everybody on board ship, even a larger ship. By the time we were into a voyage of any length, I got to see them firsthand when they came to eat. And I really enjoyed that factor to the fact that I was a big factor in the morale. If you could make food, whatever you had, and many times we ran low on food because there's no stores out in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when you put enough, we always put enough on, we figured, for about 40 to 50 days. And when we were out longer than that, well, then you started running out pretty low.
I had to be creative.
Then you had to be creative. And I'll tell you another thing. How would you be creative if all you could serve for 7 days was pancakes?
Oh,
We had pancake batter came in 25-pound cans. And when we got back in from one of these voyages out here, we had some extra duty to pick up a ship that was out here near the equator. And by the time we got them back to Pearl Harbor, we were, the last 7 days in, we had pancakes. We did not have any butter or syrup. We had no coffee.
Oh, wow.
We had no sugar. I didn't clean the range off because I didn't want to use up the grease that was on there. So I just took the water, made the pancakes, and when they came up, they got 2 pancakes. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And at night, in the middle of the night, for the people that are working on the night watch, pancakes again. The irony of it all was that when we pulled into Pearl Harbor, they had prepared food waiting for us. And they fed us real good for 2 days till we could get restocked and I could start cooking on our own again. When we got all over that, the captain called me up to his cabin one time and he said, "Cookie, if you ever serve a pancake on this ship again, I'm going to throw your butt over the side." We didn't have pancakes for a very long time.
So now looking back, I mean, now do you still have I don't want to say PTSD, but do you ever have like repressed memories of pancakes or?
Yes, to this day. I sometimes I enjoy them and they taste good, and other times I eat them because they're there. I still, back in here or back here, pancakes is not a good breakfast for me.
So we're from. Did you ever go anywhere else besides the Pacific Ocean?
No, all of my duty was in the Pacific Ocean. Well, one day when we were coming out of Long Beach Harbor, this picture from the paper there at the Long Beach newspaper had us in there with a little article about being on patrol and what our duties were on board a destroyer escort vessel. And when I was in my white uniform, that's what I looked like in my whites. This is about 1944, 45. Then the next vessel that I was on was a refrigerated cargo ship. And in this vessel here, this was built for the one of the seafood companies, for a vessel that went out and got tuna fish. And then they put it in this ship, and they had holes. All of these holes here were refrigerated to hold the fish. Well, in our duty, we put frozen meat, frozen cheeses, and different other frozen products, frozen pies and stuff like that. And so that vessel, we went on. Let me see here if I got this one right. This was the trip that we made. We left Pearl Harbor. We went out out to Johnson Island and Midway, and then into Pearl Harbor. And while we were in Pearl Harbor, the war ended. And that night, that day when the Pearl Harbor ended, this was our menu I cooked up for all of the people on board the ship. And I'll read it to you. We had iced pineapple juice, beef broth and rice soup, roast tom turkey, baked Virginia ham, mashed potatoes, giblet gravy, buttered English peas, sliced grilled tomatoes, hearts of celery, olives, sweet pickles, hot biscuits and butter, jam and honey, strawberry ice cream and coffee. And that was the meal that I cooked the day that the war ended.
Now, VJ,
with Japan.
What is VJ?
VJ is the war with Japan.
Wow. So, when Nagasaki hit, or Hiroshima, how close were you to that?